I don't know if this is going to be a hot take or not, but I am of the personal belief that creativity is something that can be learned, and not only can be learned, is inherently a learned thing. There are people, that I think you would look at and you say, wow, that person's just so creative. And sure, maybe that person has always been viewed as creative, but even still, I think that kind of thing comes from environment. It comes from being around creative people, being in environments that support one being creative, and I think also that not everyone always has been as creative as they currently are. I mean, creativity needs inspiration, right? Like if you're gonna, like, nothing comes from nothing. It has to come from something in terms of ideas. In order to get to these ideas, you need to consume creative works or be exposed to a multi-faceted variety of things, right? So that's kind of what I want to talk about today, is creativity. And I think sort of like the synopsis of what I want to talk about is we owe it to ourselves to be creative and actively seek to be as creative as we possibly can be. My name is Robin. I go under the handle The Eclectus on most social media you can find me on. If there's a few variations elsewhere, but if you look up The Eclectus and you don't find me, I'm probably just not on that platform. But back to the topic at hand. Creativity. Like, what would you really say creativity is? Which, I mean, like, there are many ways you can define it. You can do like a dictionary definition, but I kind of feel like that's sometimes a cop-out, especially with things that are very subjective, which I feel like creativity is. What one person might deem creative, the other one might not. But for the sake of this video, I think creativity is the ability to create original work. Original being a loose term, is even some things like a fan fiction, even though they do pull from previously established settings and characters and story beats, still tell an original story that wouldn't have existed without the creator, the author in this instance of the fan fiction, sitting down and deciding, I want to write this. So using that definition of creativity as the ability to create, let's just talk about creativity. I personally would consider myself a creative person. I think most people consider themselves creative people, although I have met several people who are like, oh, I'm just not creative. In the same way that I don't draw, And I also admit that if I sat down, and really set myself for a long period of time to drawing, I could learn to draw. Anyone can, but it's not something that I personally would, at least I don't believe I would gain much enjoyment out of. However, creativity is not like that in the sense that there's one way to do it and you either get enjoyment out of it or you don't. There are so many ways to be creative in your day-to-day life, and that doesn't even just mean creating art. Things like decorating your own room or your apartment or your house can show creativity. Maybe even editing your planner or making a new chore list, could be creativity is simply, I feel like, the important part of it. And I think the part that we get enjoyment out of is taking time to sit down and change something or create something, And I think we owe it to ourselves to do that, because right now, it's 2025, it's November 2nd, as of day of recording. The world does not want us to be creative. With stuff like generative AI, and like the time sink that is doom scrolling, the world benefits from us, not the world benefits, but like the top 1%, the people making money off of us, benefit from us not thinking for ourselves in creative ways. Because when we're not being creative, when we're not sinking time into creative ventures, oftentimes it is to the benefit of those top 1% because we're doing things like doom scrolling, watching AI slop, God forbid, making AI slop, right? And creativity brings so much joy into one's life. It forces one to think more about how they interact with that which they are creating. It forces one to slow down pretty frequently. A lot of creative ventures such as writing, reading, making art, making music, learning music, requires one to think about it. It's not something that can be done properly if it's done haphazardly. And also, if one is being creative, one starts to ask questions and starts to think about things from different angles. One thing I hate, one thing I loathe, is the sort of anti-intellectual notion that, it's not that deep, especially in things like reading. Like, maybe this is kind of a tangent, but like, anti-intellectualism has become such a problem in terms of like media literacy and media consumption, where it's like, this doesn't really symbolize this because it doesn't outwardly say it, and hates on stuff like symbolism, and you're just seeing things. Like, I would rather be thinking about something in a way that's too deep when it's not that deep than the other way around, and think it's not that deep when it is that deep, But creativity, back to the original point I was actually talking about, forces us to sit down and really spend our time in a way that is meaningful. And also, you don't need to create things because there is some monetary benefit. You don't even need to be good, or quote unquote good, in the way society may deem good, at creating, because you don't need to do it as a business. Your work that you make doesn't gain value based off of how much money you make out of it. Artist for the artist. The value you get is equal to the enjoyment you get out of making that art, finishing that art, and sharing it in whatever way you want to. Even if you don't want to share it, that's also perfectly fine. Again, however you interact with that art can bring enjoyment outside of monetary gain, So how do we be more creative? And I think it's kind of like a muscle, It's something that, it's not like you need to actively work out, you don't have to go for a run to be more creative. I think personally that intentionality goes a long way. Sitting down and being like, I'm going to write today, I'm going to write at least once a week, or 30 minutes a day. I'm going to read 30 minutes a day. I'm going to work on like my current drawing for 15 minutes today. I'm going to work on this piece of piano music for 20 minutes today. Sitting down, and you know what? If you miss a day, don't beat yourself up. I feel like a lot of goals, such as trying to train one's creativity or actively nurture one's creativity, can be easily lost if you're holding yourself to a strict schedule. Because the moment you break that schedule once, you're gonna be very inclined to be like, I have to get back on track. So the next time you're like, I want to do doubles so I make up for it. But then you sit down, you're like, I don't have time to do doubles, so I might as well not do it. Be kind to yourself with your goals, but still pursue them. I think, and also try new things. Maybe painting. Maybe painting is the most fun thing you've ever done, and you would not have known unless you tried it. Same with trying an instrument. Same with singing or dance or creative writing. Many of these things have a very low barrier to entry. Maybe you can rent an instrument from a local institution for a week for a pretty low price. Writing can be done for free, Reading, you can go to your library and get a book for free. And again, that's one thing where it's like you don't need, like, your only source of creativity doesn't need to be stuff you're already good at. If that was always the case, then no one would be good at anything ever. Again, do stuff for yourself. Consume art for yourself. Produce art for yourself. not for monetary value, not for anyone else, but for you. You have something valuable to say. Everyone does. And there's so many fun and creative ways that you can say it. I don't know how rambly today got. I haven't made like a long form video in a long while. Things have been kind of crazy on my end. Lots of events. Halloween just happened. A few weeks back I had strep. That wasn't fun. That was about a month ago. Oh my goodness. But I do post a lot more on TikTok than I do on YouTube. I do want to make an effort to post on YouTube more. I do enjoy long form content. You know, I like being able to sit down, and making videos like this is another outlet of creativity for me. And it makes me think about things that I may not normally think about. Anyways, you take care now. You enjoy yourself, all right?